Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
And I feel that my adult life has not been as challenging. So I went through it all already. And so that's what I tell our young folks. I was like, you've been through a lot, and you've already managed more than so many people, and you've made it through. And now you have this foundation of knowing what you can make it through. What I would tell my 15-year-old self is like, it was hard, but you're going to be okay, and life will be okay.
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA volunteer, a court-appointed special advocate for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA. My guest today is a remarkable woman with many, many talents. She works with kids. She works with nature. She works as an artist. She's also a former foster youth who had some really rough teenage years, but she got up and out of it, and now she helps others do the same. Unfortunately, there were some technical difficulties in the recording, and in spite of the tremendous efforts of my engineers, it's not really solved. But I think her story is really important, so here it is. Oh, and there was a cat involved, her cat actually, but it's not his fault. So here's Diane Martell. Hi, so I'm here with Diane Martell. Thank you, Diane, for coming on. Hi. So I'm just going to get right into this because you're a person I admire very, very much, the work that you do at Peace for Kids. And I want to know, where are you from and how did you end up in Los Angeles?
I think it's a really wonderful path. I was born in Canada. I was adopted at 6 months old, and shortly after I was adopted, my adoptive family moved to Northern California, to the Bay Area, Concord.
You seem like a NoCal girl, actually, now that I hear that. Yeah.
I do love San Francisco, that's for sure. It's one of my favorite cities. So my path certainly took a few turns, but I did end up down at college at Cal State Long Beach. And I went there for a few years and then went back up to Northern California and had one of my most favorite jobs. And that was as an arts and crafts director at a YMCA camp. I highly recommend it. If anybody's
You learned a lot about yourself, right?
Oh, it was amazing. It was because I wasn't a camp counselor. I had a little more freedom to do what I wanted during the day. And my best friend from college was also there. And she was the head wrangler. So we would go horseback riding in the morning and then eat a big breakfast, and then I would work with kids, teaching them how to...
Okay, for our listeners, a cat just walked across the screen. If you hear purring, you know what's going on.
You know what's going on. Anyways, long story short, that brought me back to Northern California, and I was going to come back down to Long Beach and just couldn't quite convince myself to go. So I looked at apartments in San Francisco, and an apartment in San Francisco was the same price as a one-way ticket to London. And so
wow.
I decided to take the one-way ticket to London. So I ended up in Europe for a couple of years. I worked in a pub.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I worked in a pub in Farringdon. I didn't realize how expensive London would be. I had one goal. I was 20 at the time. I was going to go to the Hippodrome and I was going to buy a Tom Collins and I was going to dance the night away. So I accomplished that goal, but spent some money along the way. So I had to get a job pretty quickly. Met a lot of folks who travel. I was supposed to go to Thailand. And so I saved enough money to take the train to Paris, to Rome, and then I was flying from Rome to Thailand, and then from Thailand to Australia, and I was going to work my way back home. Along the way, I was at the hostel in Paris, and I met an Australian, and they said, was it difficult to get your visa for Australia? It's like, visa? What do you mean visa? She's like, you need a visa. And I was like, oh. So I go to the Australian consulate, and she said, well, how much money will you have when you land in Australia? A lot. She said, well, she's like, I'd love to give you a visa, but they'll deport you at your own cost, so I'm not going to do that. So I ended up in Italy, and I stayed in Italy for a year, almost a year and a half. They say if I would have stayed any longer, I wouldn't have come back. But I ended up back into Los Angeles, where I reconnected with my best friend from college, stayed on her floor until I reestablished myself in LA. And I have been in LA ever since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're like a lot of people, and this happened to me too, that I came and I thought I would end up going to many, many other places, but I stayed in LA. I love it here. Mm-hmm. Or rather, if I had a lot of money, I'd go all over the place and spend time elsewhere. So let me ask you, I know, so you were adopted when you were a baby, but you also spent time in the foster care system as a teenager?
I did, yeah. When I was around 15, 16. It's not a story I disclose often or at all. But I was removed from my house when I was 15, 16 years old because of physical and sexual abuse. And my family it wasn't the easiest time growing up. I subsequently went to a lot of therapy, and my therapist, really, really wonderful man, sagely identified that frequently, consciously or subconsciously, when people are coming from an abusive situation, from a multi-generational abusive situation, they'll kind of plan to abuse somebody else. And so I have 4 older brothers, and when they adopted me, they really wanted a girl, a family. So I came to learn that both of my adopted parents had been physically and potentially sexually abused, and how that crosses over generations is really, really quite interesting.
I see.
But I was taken in by a really wonderful couple, my English teacher.
Let me just ask you though, so did you reach out for help, or did somebody figure out what was going on, and how did that work?
That's a great question. I was documenting my experiences in a journal to my English teacher, and the abuse had actually subsided, but then it started to pick up again. And so I began to disclose my experiences in this journal, and this journal was handed in, I think, like on a monthly basis. So my teacher wasn't aware of it immediately, but my journal was in my locker. And something had happened at home where my adopted mom was rather mistrusting of me. And I think that, I don't know, I had lip balm or lip gloss, and she was wondering where I gotten it.
A teenage thing, yeah.
A teenage thing. And so she wanted to go check out my locker. And of course I knew that, she was going to discover this notebook. And so I ran away. So that really lifted the lid off of my experiences and what I was going through. And of course the school, unbeknownst to me at the time as mandated reporters, had to report. And so that really kind of shifted things.
All right. So did you end up in custody of some kind and then end up with the English teacher?
I ended up, my mom put me in a convent.
Really?
Yes. So my family was very religious and very connected to the church. So off away I went to the convent, which was, as a 16-year-old girl, just I was lost, right?
Yeah,
And
I
the therapy we went to was via a priest, and we were very concerned about remedying my parents' relationship because they felt that that was sort of the genesis of what had occurred. And as a 16-year-old, it was not my concern. And it wasn't very effective being in the convent. I think one of the most pivotal things that happened in my life, and it's something that I share when I connect with young folks in our community, is my mom had the option, and I understood as I've matured and progressed into adulthood, she had a choice that my dad leave the house or I leave the house. So she chose me to leave the house. And I think that was her way to keep me safe at the time, but it broke my heart.
Yeah,
because I
sure.
was in a space I didn't understand why I was the one who was needed to be ostracized when I wasn't the one to blame.
Right, and did you feel like she was blaming you as well? Or perhaps it felt that way because she was sending you away.
Yes. No, there had been situations, previous experiences that she had placed the blame squarely
On you.
on me. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So the therapy via the Catholic Church that just was not successful. And it was the first time in my life that I advocated for myself. And I said I didn't want to go back and I wanted to make a shift and I didn't want to live in a convent. And so it was at that time, as a kind of temporary solution, that Wendy and Phil offered to open their house.
And that was your English teacher?
Yeah. Have a dysfunctional 16-year-old come to stay.
Mm-hmm. And how was that?
Amazing. It was, and I advocated through the process, and it was really wonderful to see. For me, it was really quite a space of normality that I had not experienced growing up. So it was a really, really wonderful experience.
Yeah, it's really amazing when caring adults step up, and
it is.
They can make a big difference in kids' lives. And
huge difference.
Right. And of course, that's what you're doing on a regular basis at Peace for Kids. So I want to get to that because I know that there was a circuitous route for you to find Peace for Kids, but a really compelling one. So will you tell me about that?
Sure. And I do, for Wendy and Phil, and I think it's important to share that there was actually a fissure in our relationship, and it was only due to me because I wasn't aware of how to maintain relationships. So I basically dropped out of school, and I wasn't proud of it, and I didn't know how to tell them that, and so I didn't. And then the gap grew, and I didn't have things to communicate. But 25 years later, we have reunited and made that connection. And a lot of the work I do in honor of what they had done for me as a young person, because I think it's very important for adults to step up. So I think it's important to honor them in that.
Right. Do you think that they were just like figuring out how to do it because you landed in their lap?
Oh, for sure.
Or
yeah, they didn't have kids of their own. They did after I had left, but yeah.
Good on them, huh?
Oh, yeah, for sure. But how I found Peace for Kids, I was connected to Peace for Kids through a colleague. I had a long career at the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, and one of my...
Oh, yeah, that made you famous, right?
It's some of my fame.
Can I hear about that, too?
It's going to be a little bit. It's not going to be all my fame. But it is a little bit of fame, that's for sure. So I was at the Coffee Bean. Well, I guess it was like post Coffee Bean, but my colleague Joe connected, and he said, I do work with this wonderful organization, and we are about to have a board retreat, and I am looking for some team building activities, for a way to work on our mission statement etc. And so I started giving him all of these potential opportunities or options to work with. And I knew Joe, and Joe is a wonderful man, a man of few words. And I could tell that he was kind of shifting towards or moving me towards, like, can you just do it instead of giving me.
Oh, so he was like making a path for you to actually do what he wanted you to do.
And it sounds like it would be valuable for somebody to come and facilitate. He's like, yes, that's my direct ask. So I went out to Palm Springs for a Peace for Kids board retreat that was, I guess, about 12 years ago, and facilitated some team building exercises and an exercise around revamping a mission statement. So it was really, really wonderful. We went to dinner that night to connect and team build and get to know each other a little bit more. And through this whole process, they didn't know that I had a foster care experience. And all of the people at the table were some of the most fantastic people I had met as of yet. I was like, gosh, these people are just really wonderful, and I would really like to spend more time. So after they discovered my experience, they turned around pretty quickly and invited me to be on the board. And then shortly after that, it was sort of this culmination, this vortex of things happening. The co-founder, Marnie Otway, was moving to New Zealand, and so stepping down as board chair. So within 6 months, I assumed the role of chair of the board, and for 6 years volunteered my time in that capacity.
So I want to ask you, and this might be a difficult question to answer, but I'm assuming from what you've said so far that your experience of abuse you put aside. You put it like in a pocket, like in your back pocket or in a closet. And working now with youth who've spent time in foster care, does that bubble up for you now regularly? Have you had to confront that, resolve that, or do you feel like that's been a process that's happening throughout your life?
Yeah, I feel that I had a really amazing therapist, and that's a whole other story that we'll have to spend another day on. But Dr. Felix Pohl, and he taught this wonderful technique in which it helped me to organize my experiences, emotions, and feelings. So it was a really wonderful process in which I could allow feelings to emerge, not emerge. It was almost that like first step in boundary taking, right? Allowing experiences to come in, people to come in or not in your life. So it was a really wonderful methodology. And then also working through experiences.
So it was a way for you to understand and also process your feelings?
And my experiences, for sure. That I can see the sort of foundation of what it was at the time and how it's manifested and evolved into a way to effectively self-reflect and connect with myself and to also support others.
Right. And can you tell me about the work that you do now with Peace for Kids? You're a program coordinator, manager. You actually develop the programs, but you deal with the kids so much, it seems to me. I mean, I know I've learned so much from you just watching you. I mentioned this to you recently, and you said, well, there's been so many experiences like that. But I remember you dealing with with a toddler, basically. Maybe he was 4. And he just had a total meltdown, complete and total meltdown out of the blue, it seemed. And you just comforted him for about a half an hour while crying and screaming. And it's like you knew that you just needed to let him do that and to get to the other side of that.
You know, I think something that's really beautiful about Peace for Kids is its reciprocal nature, the value that I receive from engaging. So my official title is program consultant. I found that as I have evolved in my work, I hone in on the things that I have great strengths and assets, and I also have great passion. So I work in organizing and organizational development and organizing and creating and developing programs. And then also I think what's really valuable is knowledge transfer. And I think that you can learn how to engage with children in a very meaningful way. And I have had the wonderful benefit of engaging in some of that learning at Peace for Kids, and in turn teaching other folks to do it. So, they have the old saying, if you want to know something, read about it. If you want to understand it, write about it. If you want to master it, teach it. So the more that I engage with folks and how to engage with young people in a very meaningful and cathartic way, I think the better skilled I become. And it's actually really quite amazing to me that one of the most important aspects of what we do as human beings is developing and raising the next generation, that there's no required teaching. I think there's so much to know. So here we expect to learn via what has been done, what we've experienced. My experience growing up was not something I wanted to emulate or use as techniques. It's fascinating to me to be able to learn these later in life. And certainly when I engage with other people's children, I'm quite successful. And they like, oh, you're like, you'd be such a good mother. I'm like, okay, I'm a good person. And this is how I think it's important to engage with our children, because I didn't have some of those experiences when I was little. And one of the things that sticks out to me in my foster care experience or in my youth and my development is, the teachers that called me liars, who like, why are you doing this? And I was lying to be protective of an abusive family, right? And also exhibiting signs of somebody who had experienced trauma by my behavior. And Zaid, our executive director, and I, we've had this conversation a number of times of why didn't any adult know or do something? Because it was obvious by what I was exhibiting that there was some issue somewhere, that I was struggling. And so I see that today when I see our young folks. It's like somebody's got to stand up for and see when something's, when they're having a real struggle, that it's not innately them, but something that they've experienced. So I have found the pedagogy of Peace for Kids and its constant evolution. We, like the foster care experience, are evolving and adaptable and growing and learning and applying new principles. And so that's probably what you saw in action.
Yeah, it also was astounding because you didn't try to stop him from expressing his feelings and from being in anguish. You weren't trying to calm him down. Well, you were trying to calm him down, yes, but you weren't saying, you're okay, quiet, or, you weren't trying to stop him from exploding. You were just letting him do that in order to get it out of his system, because you knew that whatever happening in him psychically and emotionally, he needed to get through and to process.
Well, and it's that's how we've evolved the halves, our way of connecting with young folks, right? It's to hear and to acknowledge, to validate. I see you are struggling right now. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, and a lot of people are like, oh, you got to have a strong hand with kids. It's like, you don't have to agree with their struggle, but you can acknowledge the struggle.
Right.
And when, frequently that's what somebody wants, is to like, yes, this is how I'm feeling, and let me feel this way for a little bit, and then articulating that, understanding why they would feel that way. And it's a model in which we hope that a young person will take on themselves, right? The more that they see it modeled for them, that they'll self-initiate this process in the future, where I can see why I'm upset right now, and be able to watch themselves
ideal.
through.
Yeah.
To be able to shift.
Yeah. I mean, I aspire to that now as an adult. I think
sure,
about
right?
that. Like, how do I take care of myself? How do I calm myself down? Especially now, in the time of COVID. And people don't know this about me, but I'm extremely anxious, and I don't even actually know it that much myself. And then I look at how I'm behaving and realize that it's really true, that it's true for all of us. So how did that adjustment happen for you at Peace for Kids? Did you start out really good? You've talked about that you've evolved in your ability to do the work that you're doing.
Yes. Well, we get a lot of practice, so there's a lot of young folks, and it's not to say, we say that sometimes our Saturday is an incubator, but it's an incubator for understanding how to honor children in a most powerful way. So you can definitely feel when you got it wrong, right? And there's an experience that stands out to me of a young person, probably similar in age to the young person you saw me with. And this young person was really struggling and would really kind of act out and be unsafe with themselves and unsafe with the community. And, the teacher who is like most amazing with young folks was struggling as well and trying to manage 16 to 24 to 6-year-olds that's a Herculean effort sometimes, particularly when somebody's really choosing to, dance on the tables and throw things. And so that particular experience, I needed to restrain a young person, and we were certified in techniques in which to restrain in a thoughtful way. I removed the young person from the room, and they were really unhappy and continued to act out, and I was trying to restrain from behind. It felt just awful. It didn't feel right. And I knew the practical steps, but the practical steps was not getting the result that I wanted. And
right, they weren't working.
They were not working. Yeah. And so,
and that happens.
So, the day ended. The young person eventually calmed down, but I felt it created a real fissure in our relationship. That there was a sense of trust loss. Like, why were you doing this to me? One of the things that we do at the end of every program day at Peace for Kids is we debrief. And so you can get get collective feedback from folks. And I received some really wonderful feedback about how I could have described more what I was doing, inviting the young person into the process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You mean like saying, I'm gonna hold you now, so that you stop flailing about. You might hurt yourself or hit someone else, right?
Yeah. So being very verbal with them and having an adult conversation with them about what you're doing, why you're doing it. And that made sense to me. And I didn't invite them into the solution. So that was years ago. And this young person is still involved with Peace for Kids. And the wonderful thing, it took a long time to reconnect and build that trust. And now I sense that we have a real genuine relationship.
So when you say a long time, like 3 years, 4 years?
5 years?
5 years of seeing them almost every Saturday.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that also, to me, is a great indicator of how important it is to get it right the first time and to really practice. And through this process that we've developed, there is no restraint happening. There's very little punitive, if any, punitive engagement at Peace for Kids. There's no suspensions. There's no restraint. There's no, so through this method of communication and connection, you can kind of avoid all those things. And it takes time to build relationships, and it takes time to develop the skills. And I think it takes the ability to be self-reflective in the moment, to say, that wasn't really, what I wanted to do. And, there's been a few folks who we've come back at the end of the debrief, and it's like, we have done everything. I don't have any other techniques left. But you get collective energy from the group and you recommit and say, all right, we will try something different. The next time this young person comes in, then you see success. This particular person, a different person, has shifted. And it's a culmination of things, right? It's not just Peace for Kids, but it's a caregiver who's been consistent, a caregiver who says, you're not going to be 7 or 14 days, and I'm going to bring your sibling in as well, so you have some level of comfort. And so all of these things you could see really shifting this young person's experience to feel a little more grounded in who they are as a human. It's been really, really beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I remember being struck by, and I've written about this, but my first days at Peace for Kids as a volunteer, I was kind of perplexed by these kids that would come in and start immediately looking for their siblings. They'd say, "Where's my sister? Where's my sister? Have you seen my brother?" And I thought that was odd because I thought, well, why don't they know where they are? Didn't they come with them? And then somebody, maybe you, explained to me, well, they're not living with their brother or sister. They're in different foster homes. So the only time they get to see each other is on Saturdays. And that's why they would be frantically looking for their older brother or little sister, because they hadn't seen them all week. And I was just so struck by that. And then I started thinking, well, what is actually Peace for Kids, the organization? How do the kids get there? Who comprises the Peace for Kids community? Can you explain that to me? Because I think a lot of people don't understand how foster care works.
Sure.
That they think that's taking kids in, but actually it's really often dispersing kids is what it's actually doing. So can you talk about how the families and caregivers work to bring kids at Peace for Kids?
Sure. Peace for Kids is very much a word of mouth organization. And we've done that intentionally, right? Our goal has never to be the biggest, but to be the most thoughtful in how we can engage and honor an experience of a young person while they're in our environment. Caregivers tell caregivers, and even if children are reunified with their biological families, they're still welcome to join us because, I think one of the things that is of value is that when a young person comes in to Peace for Kids, they have the quick discovery that most of the people there have had a foster care experience. All the kids have.
Right, and many of the volunteers, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And so when you can reflect on and empathize with their experience, it's really quite compelling. And to see their little eyeballs light up is really a wonderful thing. So we do have relationships with DCFS, and some folks get recommended through there, caregiver referrals, and community referrals. And then where we're really, I don't want to say it's shifting our energy. As I alluded to earlier, that our Saturday program is a bit of an incubator, right, of how to... And we worked with some young folks for a really, really long time, so we can understand a little more holistically our efforts and how they have, either worked or not worked, and again, we can kind of shift the dial. And so, one of our goals as an organization is to communicate this out to the greater public, right, and to how we engage with our young people and how everybody engages with young people can really make a difference on this planet, right? And how we connect and honor and elevate our young folks. We have a book club at Peace for Kids, and we finished a book over the summer. We started it with the racial reckoning around George Floyd, and so one of the books we read is called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. The author is really a wonderful and compelling author, Dr. Joy. The opening of the book is a Messiah quote, and is, "How are the children?" That's what they'll ask. How are the children? Not how are your children, but how are the children? And if more people asked, how are the children, it really tells us, society, from a society standpoint, how we are engaging. And we're doing the right things when we ask, how are the children? That was one of the most compelling things I've read that quickly adopted at Peace for Kids. And it's always coming through, how are the children? Are they okay? And what can we do to support them on their journey?
Let me ask you, I know that art is very important in your life, not only because of expression, but because of the healing nature of art. And there's a lot of those activities at Peace for Kids that encourage the artistic expression. But I want to talk about art in your own life. Did that start at an early age, and how is it happening now?
Yes, there are a few things that I engaged in early on, and building, kind of my insular little world. I was a prolific reader, so I could read, probably 10, 12 books a week. I read a lot.
Wow.
Then I also began to draw early on, and I have some great talent. And So when I went to college, or as I was graduating high school, I was taking AP courses, and creative writing teacher and my art teacher were like fighting over like, no, you should do art. And the other's like, no, you should write. No, you should do art. No, you should write. So I think it is in cathartic expression. Now I've combined the best of both worlds because all of my paintings have writing. So it is a way in which I find release, and it's a way in which I can really effectually communicate the human condition, my personal human condition, and I think the human condition as a whole. It's figurative work, frequently. Mixed media. I love found objects and reimagining them. And then the writing is usually kind of the meanderings of my mind. And so it somewhat plays the role of a diary. I have an interesting experience where when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I was always on the search for my biological mother. And I think that's just something, you always have this want to connect with family, right? Mm-hmm. And so I understand that in our young people, no matter what the experience has been, just wanting to be this part of the family. So Canada has a little more open process in finding folks. So I found my biological mom know that I was on this planet, and she wrote me a letter. The letter echoed the experience I had as that 15-year-old, where I'm going to choose my husband over you. And so she, in an 8-page letter, wrote the same thing. It's like, my husband doesn't know that you are alive. And I was like, what is up with these people? So I got really upset, and I locked myself away for the weekend, and I painted this extraordinary painting. I actually drew it out first. So I have that sketch, which I'm grateful that I kept, but I did this beautiful painting, and in the back, just kind of all my thoughts about this experience. And then I burned the letter. I wish I didn't do that, by the way, but it was meant to be. And then I had an art show like that next year. Painting was my primary source of income at the time, and that was the first painting that sold in that exhibit, because I think you could really, the emotion is very, very palpable. And so I think that art is such a tremendous way to really process and reflect on experiences and to be able to release them. And the painting has a home with a very wonderful person, and I was able to release that experience. And
let me ask you, if you right now could go back and talk to your 15-year-old self as an adult, what do you think? What would you say?
Great question. I think that it's going to be okay. One of the things that I share with our young folks, and I believe in this very strongly, if you've had a challenged childhood, if you've had trauma and struggle and abuse, and if you process it, you can't not do the work, right? Mm-hmm. You have to reflect on your experience. You have to get support to help you through what your experiences have been, and so that you don't sort of replicate or carry those on, that you will have an easier foray into your adulthood. And I feel that my adult life has not been as challenging. So I went through it all already. And so that's what I tell our young folks. I was like, you've been through a lot, and you've already managed more than so many people, and you've made it through. And now you have this foundation of knowing what you can make it through. And so it's, to me, sort of an interesting lens in which to manifest, how we progress in life. So a very kind of long-winded what I would tell my 15-year-old self is like, it was hard, but
you're going to be okay.
You're going to be okay, and life will be okay.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to do that to my my child self too.
Right.
Probably most people feel that way, but for some, I think it's even more powerful. Okay, this is my last question. And you may or may not want to answer this, but what is the one thing that people would not know about you unless you told them?
Well, I just told you that I ran off when I was 20. Not everybody knows that, but some people know that. People know about my billion-dollar invention.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and now people know my love for sappy Hallmark movies. I've been giving away my secrets a little bit at a time.
Is that your final answer?
That's my final answer. I've got a few mysteries, but there's some things that I have to process before they're released to the world in general.
I think a lot of times what at first appear to be a vulnerability or the challenge that ends up being a strength. And I bet that's also very true of you, that your childhood experience of trauma has made you an extremely empathetic and effective, a really effective person. You help the lives of many, many, many young people and adults.
I'm laughing out loud at that, because that was something I was thinking. I was like, not that many people know about this, because I just discovered it. I did 23andMe, because I think that's again, that people who don't have a base or foundation of who, and I've got kind of this twofold, right, of being adopted and then in foster care. I tease. That's right. By the time I got to my foster mom, I was on my third mom, and so now I'm just collecting moms along the way. So it's it's wonderful. But when I did it, one of my top gene markers was that I didn't have the gene of empathy.
Get out! That's just dumb.
And so now I use it as a joke in case. And here's the thing: is I can be really empathetic, but there is a certain point where I'm like, all right, we've just got to move forward now. So it's where empathy meets, I would say, grit of like, let's just get it done.
You know what? Now that you say that about you, I see that there's a certain stoicism that says, okay, let's just get past this and move on.
Yeah. So I thought that was funny, and now I use it as somewhat of a crutch when people are like, well, you need, I'm like, sorry, I don't have the empathy gene, so so I am not biologically built to.
All right. Well, okay. I see. That's a pretty good thing that somebody would know about you.
Yeah.
Because you appear to be extremely empathetic. Your voice, the way you look, the way you cue into people, how observant you are, how attentive you are, how expressive you are. But the truth is, you don't have the empathy gene.
So I don't know if there's fault in that biology, but I do. And I think I do think you have to work at being empathetic. And I think again, that's where something like the halves, where you stop listening to the friends in your head, and you really begin listening to the person who's in front of you. Right? There's. We're frequently...
Right, go over the halves again for me, because, I'm constantly learning them and relearning them.
To hear. And hear is not only the act of listening to you, but hearing is hearing yourself. And am I ready to step into this, whatever experience, this conversation? And it's that moment of saying, yes, okay, I'm ready to hear you. My being is ready to be involved. Then acknowledge is to say, oh, I hear you. But it's also the opportunity to get clarification, to say, oh, well, Jayne, this is what I heard you say. Do I have that right? Right? So it's to ensure that what you're hearing is actually what the person is saying or what they're thinking they're articulating, because sometimes those things are two very different things, what they're saying, what they think they're saying.
Yes, they can be.
And then the next is to validate, say, I can understand. And that's that's where empathy comes in, and trying to put yourself in that person's shoes.
You mean, so as an example, you can say, I understand that you're screaming because you're upset.
Yeah.
You're telling me that you're upset.
Well, I can understand why you would be upset. I might be upset too if that happened to me.
Okay.
Doesn't mean like you would be, right? You notice that I said I might be upset. I can understand. It makes sense. And so, and then that last piece is to shift. And one of the things that we find crucial in the model is the shift doesn't always happen right away. So the shift could happen many years down the road, or it could happen in that moment. The young person you saw me with, it seemed like it happened in that moment. The experience that I was sharing with you, I had to re-engage and I have so many times with that young person in order to get that shift in our relationship.
Right. 5 years later, that shift happens.
5 years later. And
Right, but you plant the seed over and over again.
Yes. Right. And I find that this way of engaging with my adoptive brothers, with just with adults in my life these days, also it's really valuable. It's not only valuable with children, it's valuable with adults, it's valuable in work.
Yes, I found that to be true too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Listen, thank you so much. You're a lovely human being. I've told you that before, but I want you to hear it again because I truly admire you. I admire the work that you're doing. I also appreciate your ability to empathize, even though you don't have the empathy gene. I'm going to use that too now.
Right? You'll have to go do your 23andMe or your gene marker
and find
that out. I just thought it was so funny that along with male baldness is like one of the top. I was like, oh, great. So I'm,
all right, sweetie. Thanks so much. Okay.
It's my pleasure.
I've listened to this recording several times. I keep on going back to it. And I think it's because I find it really inspiring. I hope you do too. Diane, in spite of very difficult early years, she has done the work to make her own happy life. That's what she wants, so that's what she's doing. She's making it happen. And I find that gives me hope. It makes me feel hopeful. So thank you, Diane. Thank you. If you see something, say something. If you suspect that a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. I want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful music, Eferisto. To hear more of her music, go to Spotify and Instagram at Christina Aposto. That's ChristianaAposto. I know you want to. Her stuff is really great. And thanks to my audio producer extraordinaire, Marcos Campito. I'm glad I found you. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear, please rate us and hit subscribe.